The day my father died felt like an instruction manual for grief. I was 29, I was at work. My phone blew up with a voicemail from my sister saying dad was gone. We rushed to the hospital. They handed us a death certificate and a cold sheet and an explanation that his heart had stopped in a motel and they couldn't bring him back. It was clean, it made sense. We arranged the funeral. People cried. I signed everything they put in front of me. That was the first time I signed something I didn't fully read. The funeral home handed a stack of forms, and a family friend, someone dad trusted, told me it was fine. Sign here to release the body. Sign here to close the account. Sign here to let the executor handle the estate. I signed because my hands were shaking, and because someone I believed in told me it was okay. My signature became a habit, not a legal act. 2 weeks later, a letter from the county recorder landed on my kitchen table. It was a copy of a quitclaim deed transferring our house from my name to a company I'd never heard of. My stomach dropped. The signature on the deed looked like mine. I stared until the ink swam. I knew my signature. That was my handwriting. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I called my sister. She told me to breathe. We went down to the courthouse. The clerk handed us the recorded deed and a chain of documents that made no sense. The deed had been notarized. The death certificate we'd been given was on file. A power of attorney had been filed a week before Dad died. Someone had used my name to sign away our family home and then mortgaged it to an out-of-state bank. There were phone numbers, account numbers, and a string of filings that painted the whole thing like a deliberate blueprint. I called my mother at home and she started to cry. She asked if I had signed anything else. I checked my email, my old phone, my bank. There was nothing. The more I looked, the worse it got. The mortgage showed up with a balance I'd never seen and payments that hadn't been made. The company that bought the title was an LLC created 3 days before the deed transfer. The notary's stamp had a registration number that, when we called, belonged to a woman who said she had been working at a grocery store that week. The quitclaim had my signature. The notarization had a fake stamp. The death certificate had a different doctor's name than the one who had actually signed Dad's chart. I felt like I'd been watching my life from outside my body. My hands shook. My brain did that stupid thing where it tried to make a neat plot out of chaos. I wanted to believe it was some clerical error, maybe someone with a similar name, maybe a scam. The rational voices were small. Then my neighbor texted a photo. They'd seen a man who looked exactly like my father at the gas station 2 towns over. He was buying a cheap phone and a prepaid card. I recognized his jacket, the awkward walk. I felt my vision narrow. I drove out there like a person who was sleepwalking. He was there. He pretended he didn't see me. I walked up and told him I knew he was alive. He looked at me like I was the one with the problem. He told me he had to disappear to get away from debts and bad people. He said he'd left instructions and that what he did was to protect us. He said he used my name because I was the one he trusted. He smiled like he was proud. I remember thinking in that moment that the man in front of me had built his whole life on the idea that the world was his to fix by whatever mean he needed. I screamed, not at him, at the car, at the sky. He walked away. Later that night, my sister confronted him on the phone, and he hung up. He told her to stop harassing him or he'd take steps. That was the first time I felt fear with teeth. We hired a lawyer. We had to. My mother didn't have the money. I drained what savings I had. The lawyer filed emergency motions to put a hold on the property and started digging. I felt a small fog lift. Something was being done, but the fog was replaced by a new cold, the realization that fighting him would be long and expensive. My father had planned this to make it hard to undo. He'd used shell companies, forged documents, the death certificate, and a notary who later disappeared. He'd also managed to empty some of our savings into accounts that could be traced only through a maze. Friends came through like fingers under my ribs. Jenna, my neighbor and friend since college, stayed up with me nights reading county records. She brought me coffee and a fierce quiet. My brother flew in from Seattle and said that he would take a month off. My therapist told me to focus on one thing at a time, which felt like advice from another planet. I did what I could. I organized emails. I made copies. I recorded phone calls. Every small piece of paper became a lifeline. There was a false victory. A judge issued a temporary injunction freezing the title and ordering an account hold on the mortgage. For a few days I slept. I thought we had outmaneuvered him. I thought maybe the house would stay. We celebrated with cheap wine and 2 leftover funeral candles. We thought the worst was slowing. Then the person who bought the house, an LLC that turned out to be run by a third-party buyer in Florida, filed a motion claiming they purchased the property in good faith. They had the recorded deed and argued that they paid market value. The bank threatened foreclosure because the mortgage was still delinquent. The temporary restraining order was flimsy against a bank that moved fast. Files showed wire transfers moving through Vegas and then to an account with an address that was a mailbox. The more we fought, the stranger the trail became. Allies vanished. The cashier at the title company who had helped us before suddenly refused to return our calls. One of the witnesses who had signed for the power of attorney said her signature had been traced, but she didn't remember signing. The pressure tightened like a noose. My mother received an eviction notice. I remember looking at the envelope, as if it were a physical blow. Overnight, our family home, the same porch my father had fixed with a crooked hammer and the kitchen where my mother burned a lasagna every holiday, became not ours. I slept in my car for 2 nights. My sister started staying with friends. We were losing more than a house. We were losing a sense that the world made any moral sense. The lowest point came in a diner at 2 in the morning. I watched a couple on the other side of the room argue about nothing. My phone vibrated with a message from Dad. He said he hoped we'd be all right and to stop making things messy for him. The message was calm, like he was leaving a grocery list. I remember feeling something inside me, thin and snap. Something had died that wasn't my father. It was my trust. I cried until my chest hurt, and then I realized I couldn't keep waiting for the world to fix this. I pulled everything together and stopped treating this like a legal puzzle only. I treated it like a criminal case. I hired a handwriting expert. My lawyer called a favor at the sheriff's office, and an investigator dug into the bank wires. Jenna found surveillance footage from the county recorder's building showing a man in a hoodie watching while papers were filed. The footage was grainy, but the pattern of his motion matched Dad's. We found receipts showing a motel room booked under a fake name the night of the fake death. A private investigator traced the prepaid phone purchases to a man whose vehicle identification number matched one registered to my father years ago. When I put the pieces together, the narrative became ugly and clear. He'd staged a death using a fake body ID, bought a false death certificate, moved money through shell companies, and used forged documents, including my signature, to clear title and mortgage the house. He'd planned an exodus and then relied on the law's inertia and the bank's appetite to make that exit permanent. But he made mistakes. He used a motel with a lax camera system. He used a notary who was lazy enough to loan her stamp. He used a bank that left a shallow trail. We took our folder to the sheriff. The detective I met was a woman who didn't have the patience for theatrics. She looked at the evidence and said flatly this was fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Within a week, a warrant was issued. They found him in a cheap rental outside Albany, 2 states away, with a new driver's license and a stack of prepaid debit cards. He didn't run. He sat at the table, drinking bad coffee, and told the detective he had been trying to right wrongs. He refused to look at me on the day they took him to the airport to be extradited. The trial was messy and public. The media got involved after a reporter from the local paper picked up the sheriff's press release and a neighbor's outrage. My sister read a short statement outside the courthouse. She said he had betrayed trust and used our family like a business ledger. People in our town stared. Some called us greedy. Some called us victims. My aunt refused to speak to me because she believed in redemption for men like him. Friends offered sympathy and then distance. The crowd felt both protective and savage. He was convicted on several counts: forgery, fraud, making a false instrument, and theft by deception. The judge ordered parts of the house's title returned and set a civil date for the quiet title action to sort out the chain of transfers. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast. We had to sell the house to pay legal bills and put my mother in a smaller, safer place. We lost memorabilia in the sense of being anchored to a childhood home. But legally, I got something back, a declaration that the deed transferring the house was void because of the forgery and fraud. The bank's mortgage was declared void as well. Once the court traced the chain as tainted, the hardest part was not the courtroom. It was the moment after sentencing when the officers walked my father past me. He looked at me like he was apologizing for missing a bus. I felt none of the old pity. I felt a quiet, sharp boundary set in my chest like a bone. I told him I never wanted to see him again. He said he hoped I could forgive him. I didn't answer. Forgiveness felt like something that would let him off the hook. I wanted consequences. He got them. Months later, I sat on the steps of a new apartment with a small cardboard box of my mother's photos. Jenna handed me a coffee and said we were okay. My mother laughed at a memory and then wiped her eyes. My sister texted a photo of a framed picture of us as kids on a shelf that would never be sold. I felt tired, raw, and steadier. I kept the receipts. I kept the court file in a folder. I changed banks. I closed accounts that had my old signatures on them and had everything notarized the sensible way. I went to therapy and learned how to say no without apologizing. I found a real estate agent who helped us buy a modest house with clean title and a person who did not fake deaths for convenience. The opposite of the first image, a funeral and a death certificate, was a quiet house with locks that only I knew the combination to and a name on a mortgage that was mine and honest. The man who faked his own death to steal our home was behind bars. The house we grew up in was not the house I live in now. Some things you can't get back. But I got the truth. I got boundaries. I got a conviction that said, you can't take someone's life and signature and call it protection. It is theft. I still wake up sometimes and listen for his key in the door. I haven't heard it come for years. When it does, it will be someone else's house. I will not sign anything for him again.